Welcome to another video, a story so disturbing it blurs the line between fear and fact. It began like any other summer night on a college campus. The air was thick with heat, the kind that settles over the Midwest in early June, and the streets of Bloomington, Indiana were alive with students enjoying their brief escape between spring finals and the rush of internships or hometown visits. Among them was Lauren Spierer, a 20-year-old fashion merchandising student at Indiana University. Petite at just under 5 feet tall, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes, Lauren had a magnetic presence. She was friendly, outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly draw people toward her with little effort. But by the time the sun rose on June 3, 2011, Lauren had vanished without a trace, and her disappearance would go on to become one of the most haunting and puzzling mysteries in recent American history. Lauren's night had begun with the kind of spontaneity college nights are made of. She had just returned from a trip to New York with her boyfriend, Jesse Wolfe. That evening, she texted friends and made plans to go out. Her boyfriend opted to stay in, tired from travel, while Lauren chose to meet up with friends for a night of drinking and partying. It was nothing unusual, college students pushing boundaries, testing their youth in small, reckless ways. But the chain of decisions Lauren made that night would create a timeline law enforcement would spend years trying to unravel 1 hour at a time, minute by minute. Around 12:30 a.m., Lauren arrived at her friend David Roan's apartment at 5 North Townhomes, a short walk from her own residence. Surveillance footage from her apartment complex captured her leaving in a white shirt, black leggings, and no shoes, a detail that would later baffle investigators and haunt her family. She carried her phone and ID in a small purse slung across her shoulder, unaware this would be the last time she was ever seen alive. Inside the apartment, Lauren joined a small group of friends that included David and a man named Jay Rosenbaum, along with another mutual acquaintance, Corey Rossman. They drank, laughed, and reportedly took shots of vodka. Lauren, who had a known heart condition and was on medication that shouldn't be mixed with alcohol, didn't seem to pace herself. By the time she left the apartment with Corey around 2:30 a.m., her balance was unsteady. Surveillance footage from the nearby Smallwood Plaza apartments captured her being supported by Corey as they entered the building. She was clearly intoxicated, staggering as she leaned heavily into his side. Corey and Lauren went back to his apartment where his roommate, Mike Beth, was also present. According to Beth, Corey had been punched earlier that night, possibly in an altercation with someone who disapproved of how drunk Lauren was, and he was beginning to fade into unconsciousness. Lauren stayed only briefly. She allegedly left the apartment just after 3 a.m. and headed a few doors down to the apartment of Jay Rosenbaum, another friend from earlier in the night. That decision, seemingly innocent, would be the last time anyone admitted to seeing her alive. Jay later told police that Lauren had been visibly drunk, and her physical condition was deteriorating. She reportedly fell at some point during the night, possibly hitting her head. Jay claimed to have tried to convince her to stay, but she insisted she wanted to go home. At approximately 4:30 a.m., Jay said he watched from his balcony as Lauren walked south on 11th Street, barefoot, phoneless, vulnerable. The direction she was walking should have led her back to her apartment just a few blocks away, but Lauren never made it. When Jesse Wolfe tried to contact Lauren later that morning and received no response, his concern grew quickly. By mid-afternoon, Lauren's parents, Robert and Charlene Spierer, had been alerted. They made immediate plans to travel from their home in Scarsdale, New York, to Bloomington. Panic took root early. Lauren was not the kind of person to disappear without contact. She was close to her parents, reliable with friends. She wasn't answering calls, wasn't returning messages. Her purse and shoes were missing, but her phone and keys were later found inside the apartment she'd left earlier. Her room was untouched, bed still made, everything eerily undisturbed. Bloomington police were quickly involved, and what began as a missing persons case spiraled into a full-blown search operation. Lauren's face appeared on flyers across campus, then across Indiana, then across the nation. Her parents stood before microphones pleading for help, offering rewards, holding back tears with every breath. Volunteers combed through woods, rivers, cornfields. Drones scanned miles of forest. Dogs sniffed through dumpsters and abandoned houses. Tips flooded in from all over the country, but nothing. No blood, no clothing, no body. It was as if Lauren had stepped into the darkness and simply disappeared. What made the case even more chilling was how narrow the window of opportunity seemed to be. Lauren's last confirmed sighting was at 4:30 a.m., walking alone on a quiet street in a well-lit college town. Her destination was just blocks away. The walk should have taken no more than 5 or 6 minutes. Somewhere along that short, familiar route, she was either abducted, injured, or worse, and no one saw a thing. The young men who were with Lauren that night were immediately questioned. Corey Rossman, Mike Beth, and Jay Rosenbaum all lawyered up early. Though not declared suspects, their sudden silence raised red flags. Corey claimed to have no memory of the night due to being punched. Jay stuck to his story that he watched Lauren leave. None of them agreed to take polygraph tests administered by Bloomington police, though some reportedly submitted to private ones conducted by their own lawyers. Law enforcement was stymied by the lack of cooperation, and theories began to fill the vacuum left behind. Was Lauren the victim of a random abduction? Did she fall somewhere and suffer a fatal injury, her body hidden by natural elements or a perpetrator? Was foul play committed by someone she trusted? The more time passed, the more questions emerged, and the fewer answers anyone had. Her parents, desperate for truth, began to suspect that someone within the circle of friends knew more than they were letting on. In the weeks that followed, investigators dug into every inch of Lauren's life. They examined text messages, analyzed surveillance footage frame by frame, retraced her steps again and again. But the trail had gone cold. Her phone had either died or been turned off, no calls, no pings. The FBI got involved, and despite bringing in advanced behavioral analysts and search teams, they too came up empty-handed. Rumors circulated around town. Some said Lauren overdosed and her friends panicked, disposing of her body. Others whispered about sex trafficking, about secret parties gone wrong, about secrets kept between friends too afraid to speak. But no hard evidence ever surfaced to support any of them. In July 2011, just a month after Lauren disappeared, another twist came, an alleged sighting. A man in Indianapolis claimed he saw a woman who looked like Lauren in a vehicle with several men. She looked disoriented, he said. The lead was investigated, but ultimately led nowhere. Tips like this would continue to come in for years, each one a flicker of hope that faded into disappointment. The case, which had once dominated headlines, slowly began to slip from the public eye. Yet for Lauren's family, time did not move the same way. Each day without answers was another day of torment, another day imagining what might have happened during those missing minutes. The pain was compounded by the silence from those closest to Lauren that night. The Spierers believed someone knew something. Someone had to. How could a young woman vanish in such a small window of time, in such a familiar place with no witnesses and no trace? By the end of the summer, the town began to return to normal. Students returned for fall semester. The posters started to fade. The case was no longer headline news, but in the Spierers' world, everything was frozen at 4:30 a.m. on June 3rd, 2011. The last time anyone saw Lauren alive, the last moment before reality split in two, one in which Lauren made it home, and one in which she never did. The silence became its own kind of violence. It wasn't just the sound of unanswered phones or the blank spaces in security footage. It was the growing vacuum where truth should have lived. Day by day, Bloomington drifted back into its rhythm of lectures, tailgates, and college town ease. But the Spierers remained anchored to an unyielding grief. They moved into a hotel near campus, transformed it into a command center, and refused to leave Indiana without their daughter. But the trail, already faint, was growing colder by the hour. Lauren's parents launched a website, hired private investigators, and worked alongside the police in an increasingly frustrating search for clues. The FBI was still involved, lending their resources, but even they seemed shackled by the scarcity of physical evidence. There was no crime scene, no weapon, no body, nothing that definitively proved whether Lauren was dead or alive. And that's what made the case so terrifying. Not only did the community not know what had happened to Lauren, they didn't even know if something had happened to her. It was the kind of disappearance that slid between the cracks of conventional logic. What did remain was a tightly woven timeline, painfully dissected but always returning to the same abyss. A 6-minute walk in the early morning darkness that led nowhere. Between 4:30 a.m. and roughly 4:36 a.m., Lauren vanished. That short walk should have taken her home. Instead, it led her into a place beyond explanation. As media attention peaked, so did the scrutiny of those last with her. Corey Rossman had been caught on camera helping Lauren through the lobby of Smallwood Plaza. He seemed more sober than she was. In the footage, she stumbled barefoot, clutching his arm. But Corey's story was a strange one. He claimed to remember almost nothing after being punched in the face during a brief altercation with another student earlier that night. According to his roommate, Mike Beth, Corey returned to their apartment with Lauren but passed out soon after. He insisted he had no idea what happened to her after that. Beth, for his part, said he barely interacted with Lauren. He said she left their apartment alone and headed to Jay Rosenbaum's. Jay, too, gave a statement that would come under intense scrutiny. He claimed Lauren had fallen, possibly more than once, and that he had urged her to stay the night. But she refused, he said. She wanted to go home. And so, Jay claimed, he watched from his balcony as Lauren disappeared into the dark. There were no other confirmed witnesses. No cameras caught her again. No one on the street that morning saw a barefoot woman stumbling home in the pre-dawn haze. That detail remained one of the most disturbing, Lauren's vulnerability. She had no shoes, no phone, no key, and was intoxicated to the point of collapse. Anyone could have approached her, lured her into a vehicle, or harmed her in some isolated corner of the neighborhood. Her physical condition, combined with her impaired judgment, made her an easy target for anyone with bad intentions. And yet, no one had come forward, not to admit an encounter, not to suggest a theory, not even with a guilty whisper. As the investigation expanded, detectives considered every possibility, however dark. Was she abducted? Did she wander off and succumb to the elements? Was she trafficked? Or had someone panicked, someone from the group she trusted, and covered up a terrible mistake? Lauren's known heart condition added another sinister layer. Her QT syndrome, a disorder affecting the electrical activity of the heart, could be exacerbated by alcohol, stress, and exhaustion. Some speculated that she might have suffered a sudden cardiac arrest, died during the night, and that the people she was with, young, drunk, terrified, had chosen to hide the body rather than face the consequences. It was a theory Lauren's parents quietly entertained, and it wasn't just because of the medical risk. It was because of the silence. Robert and Lauren Spierer were never shy in expressing their belief that someone was lying. The fact that none of the men involved agreed to speak with them or with law enforcement without lawyers raised deep suspicions. "If you have nothing to hide," Charlene said in a public statement, "why not help us?" But the answers never came. In private, police pushed hard. Search warrants were executed. Phones and computers were seized. Interviews were conducted, reconducted, and cross-checked. But no charges were filed, no arrests were made. There were no eyewitnesses to contradict the stories being told. And despite intense surveillance of potential suspects, nothing ever turned up. Not a slip of the tongue, not a whispered confession, not a single forensic clue. The public fascination with the case began to take on a life of its own. Armchair detectives dissected timelines and theorized about everything from organ trafficking rings to fraternity cover-ups. Reddit threads bloomed with speculation. Amateur sleuths scoured Lauren's social media, looking for a clue everyone else had missed. But the noise only made the silence worse. For the Spierers, each new theory was a reminder that their daughter was still missing, and no one had the courage to come forward with the truth. Then came the dead ends. In late 2011, police were alerted to a human skull found near the White River in Indianapolis. For days, hope and dread mixed in equal measure until dental records ruled it out. It wasn't Lauren. A year later, a tip from a prison inmate led investigators to search property in Morgan County, Indiana, including digging in a shallow grave behind a dilapidated house. Again, nothing. The leads kept coming. Stray items of clothing, scattered bones, anonymous tips, but none of them ever led to Lauren. One of the most haunting possibilities raised during the investigation was that Lauren may have died of an accidental overdose and that the people around her panicked. This theory, though never confirmed, had a chilling logic. It explained the silence. It explained the coordinated legal responses from the men involved. It explained why no body had been found. Lauren, barely 90 pounds, had consumed a dangerous amount of alcohol and, allegedly, had experimented with small amounts of cocaine and other substances that night. If she collapsed in someone's apartment or died in her sleep, disposing of her body might have seemed, in a moment of drunken fear, like the only option. But this theory required more than silence. It required a pact. It required multiple people to carry the weight of guilt for years, to lie to their families, their friends, and their own conscience. And as time passed, the chances of someone breaking grew smaller. If there was a secret, it had been buried deep. As the years passed, other cases came and went in the headlines, but the Spierers refused to give up. Their website remained active. Billboards stayed up. They worked with private detectives, forensic analysts, and even psychics. On anniversaries of Lauren's disappearance, they gave interviews, holding on to the belief that someone somewhere knew something. Then, in 2016, a glimmer of potential resolution emerged. But it, too, would wither away. Police arrested a man named Daniel Messel, a convicted felon, for the murder of another young woman named Hannah Wilson, also a student at Indiana University. Hannah's murder bore disturbing similarities to Lauren's disappearance. She, too, had left a party alone. Her body had been found the next day, bludgeoned and dumped in a field. And the suspect, Messel, had a violent past and no solid alibi. Speculation erupted. Could Messel have been involved in Lauren's disappearance, too? Had he been prowling the streets that night in 2011, looking for an opportunity? But investigators couldn't tie him to Lauren. There was no DNA, no forensic evidence, no history of interaction. While Messel would go on to be convicted for Hannah's murder, any potential link to Lauren's case fizzled into shadows. And so the mystery returned to where it began, silent, still, and unanswered. The grief for Lauren's family became more than emotional. It became physical. Robert Spierer spoke candidly about the toll disappearance had taken on his body, on his heart. "You just exist," he said in an interview. "You wake up, and you do what you have to do, and you try not to collapse." He died in 2022, more than a decade after Lauren vanished, never knowing what happened to his daughter. The loss of Robert deepened the tragedy. Lauren was missing, and now her father, the most relentless force in her search, was gone too. The fight remained in Charlene, but the years were grinding away at hope. Some mysteries are unsolved because the evidence is too complex. Others remain buried because no one is looking hard enough. But in Lauren's case, the mystery was like a closed door, one that countless people had knocked on, pried at, and examined inch by inch only to find it still locked, with the key hidden in plain sight. What happened to Lauren Spierer in those final moments remains one of the most chilling unknowns in modern criminal history. Did she collapse and go unnoticed? Was she taken by someone lurking in the dark? Or did someone she trusted make a decision that became a lifelong prison of guilt? The darkness that swallowed Lauren was not just physical, it was human. It was constructed of fear, secrets, silence, and the terrible fragility of trust. And more than a decade later, the question still echoes without answer. Where is Lauren Spierer? Time has a way of dulling sharp pain, of making once vivid tragedies feel like echoes, muted, distant, easier to ignore. But the mystery of Lauren Spierer never faded the way the world wanted it to. Her name refused to vanish from the conscience of Bloomington. For her mother, Charlene, every morning was another reminder that her daughter had left for a walk home on June 3rd, 2011, and never arrived. For many, Lauren's face became a symbol. For some, a warning. But for those closest to the case, the ache was different. It wasn't about closure. It was about justice. And the longer the silence held, the more it started to feel like a carefully maintained lie. The people at the center of Lauren's final night remained quiet. Corey Rossman, the man seen helping her through the lobby. Mike Beth, his roommate. Jay Rosenbaum, the last known person to see her alive. None of them were ever charged, yet their refusal to cooperate with police interviews beyond brief legal statements sent a clear message to the public. They had drawn a boundary, one no one could force them to cross. Behind that boundary may have been answers, small, horrifying, maybe accidental, but answers all the same. Without them, the case became a void filled with fragments, theories, and the terrible weight of the unknown. It wasn't just what they wouldn't say. It was what they had already said, and how little of it made sense. Corey said he couldn't remember what happened that night. A convenient blackout. Mike said he barely saw Lauren at all. Jay claimed to have watched her walk away barefoot in the middle of the night, yet made no effort to ensure her safety. Not a phone call, not a text. Just silence. These were her friends, or so it had seemed. Their detachment, their distance, and their denial were not illegal. But they were suspicious. Investigators kept circling back to one thought. Lauren did not simply vanish. Something happened to her. A body does not disappear without effort. Even if she had died accidentally, if her heart condition had struck in a moment of vulnerability, someone had to know. Someone had to be involved in what came next. But with no evidence of a crime scene, no confession, and no forensic trace, the investigation stayed trapped in a purgatory of possibility. That didn't stop the rumors. Whispers of what really happened began to spread through campus within days of Lauren's disappearance. One story went that she had overdosed and that someone, terrified of legal consequences, had dumped her body in a dumpster or taken it far outside city limits. Another said she had been sexually assaulted and silenced afterward. One of the darker stories suggested that she had never left Jay Rosenbaum's apartment alive, that the story of watching her walk away was a fabrication meant to hide something worse. But rumors, like shadows, stretch far and wide when the light is absent, and none of them could be proven. Still, one theory became dominant in the minds of many: the accidental death and cover-up. It was a narrative that explained the behavior of the young men involved. Panic, fear, the kind of poor judgment that turns a tragedy into a crime. And if Lauren had died in someone's apartment, then her disappearance became not just a mystery, but a secret, one protected by silence, lawyers, and the passage of time. That theory gained more traction when it became public that dumpsters in the area had not been searched thoroughly until days after Lauren disappeared. By then, most of the trash from Bloomington had already been sent to a landfill dozens of miles away. Police did search the landfill, digging through mountains of garbage under the oppressive summer sun, but it was like chasing a ghost in a wasteland. No clothing, no hair, no bone, nothing. If Lauren had been hidden there, she had been swallowed by time and trash, never to be found again. Lauren Spierer, tired but unyielding, never stopped calling out the people she believed were hiding something. She didn't name them often, but everyone knew who she meant. In interviews, she spoke with a quiet, devastating calm. "We're not looking for someone to say they saw Lauren at the grocery store," she once said. "We're looking for someone to say, 'I know what happened.'" As months turned into years, the trail faded further. Police continued to investigate, but offered fewer and fewer updates. Public interest waned. The university tightened its own silence. Lauren's disappearance remained unsolved, and the people around it had moved on. Graduated, found jobs, started lives. It was as if nothing had ever happened. But behind that quiet was a ticking weight, a terrible awareness that someone, somewhere, still carried the burden of the truth. Lauren's story began to influence other investigations. Law enforcement in nearby counties and other states began checking cases of unidentified remains against her profile. A woman's body found in Ohio. Bones uncovered near a river in Kentucky. Each time hope flared, then died. None of them matched Lauren. Her name was now listed on multiple national missing persons databases, her DNA entered into CODIS. But even that system returned nothing. No matches, no progress. Just digital echoes in a system meant to find the lost. But perhaps the most tragic development of all came from within the community itself. Bloomington, once shaken by Lauren's disappearance, seemed eager to forget. Flyers were removed, murals painted over. New students arrived every fall, unaware of the girl who had walked into the night and never returned. Some remembered, of course. There were still vigils on the anniversary, still posters in certain cafes, but the urgency had faded. It was no longer a campus-wide panic. It was now just a sad story students whispered during late-night walks home. "Be careful. Don't end up like Lauren Spierer." And what of Jesse Wolfe, Lauren's boyfriend? The one who had stayed behind that night? His heartbreak remained mostly private. He cooperated with police, submitted to polygraphs, and was cleared early in the investigation. He disappeared from public view soon after, retreating into a kind of grief no camera could document. Friends said he was never the same. And Lauren herself. What was left of her outside of headlines and speculation? Her life, her voice, her humor, her dreams of working in fashion, living in New York, none of it mattered to the people obsessed with solving the puzzle. To them, she was a case, a missing person, a blonde girl in a grainy photo. But to her family, she was a heartbeat stolen, a daughter stolen, a light turned off before anyone was ready to say goodbye. There was still a chance, however faint, that Lauren's remains were out there, hidden in some abandoned well, buried in an unmarked patch of forest, or tossed into a body of water no one thought to search. The FBI maintained that no lead was too small. The Spierers offered a reward. Anonymous tip lines remained open. But those closest to the investigation admitted quietly what they couldn't say aloud. If Lauren hadn't been found in the first few days, the odds of recovering her were painfully low, and without a body, there would never be answers. There would only be theories. In 2020, nearly a decade after Lauren vanished, the case made headlines again, briefly. A new tip had surfaced, though police did not reveal the source or the content. It led to a search in Martinsville, Indiana, about 30 miles from Bloomington. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Excavations were conducted. It felt for a brief moment like justice might finally wake up. But once again, nothing. No trace. No evidence. Just soil and silence. To outsiders, Lauren's case might have seemed cold, dead. But to her family and the few remaining investigators assigned to her file, it was still very much alive. They had learned to live in the pause between questions. They had learned to measure time not in days or years, but in leads, each one another rise and fall of hope. As of today, there are no suspects, no charges, no body, no crime scene. Only the knowledge that Lauren Spierer was last seen walking away barefoot in the early hours of June 3rd, 2011, and then nothing. The tragedy of her story is not just in its unresolved ending, it's in its plausibility. What happened to Lauren could happen to anyone. A young woman out with friends, one drink too many, surrounded by people she trusted, until suddenly she wasn't. It's a reminder of how quickly safety can become vulnerability, how thin the line is between an ordinary night and a lifelong mystery. And perhaps the most haunting thought of all is this: someone knows, someone remembers, someone somewhere carries the knowledge of what happened to Lauren Spierer. It might be a secret too heavy to tell, or a memory buried so deep it only surfaces in dreams. But it's there, in a basement, in a journal, in a moment one person can't take back. The world has moved on. But the question remains, where is Lauren Spierer? The years passed, and with them, so did the moments that might have once revealed a hidden truth. Bloomington aged around the mystery like a tree grows around a nail, absorbing it, hiding it, but never removing it. Buildings were remodeled, students graduated, the streets repaved, and the whispers faded. Yet somewhere beneath the surface of ordinary life, Lauren Spierer's absence still pulsed like a wound that refused to heal. Her mother, Charlene, became the enduring voice of a case gone still. With each passing year, her words grew sharper, not weaker. "This doesn't happen without help," she told reporters. "Someone knows, and someone is still hiding." She held to the belief that silence had become complicity, and that whatever happened in those early morning hours wasn't simply fate, but human error, panic, or cruelty disguised as neglect. As media coverage waned, so too did law enforcement resources. The case remained open, but it was no longer active in the way it once was. It became what investigators call cold, not for lack of interest, but for lack of evidence. Every lead had been run down, every timeline dissected, and still no arrests, no confessions, no answers, just the hollow quiet that surrounds so many unsolved crimes. For a while, there were flares of hope. A woman in Michigan claimed to have seen someone who looked like Lauren working at a gas station under an alias. A man in Illinois came forward claiming his brother had once confessed to disposing of a college girl's body around the same time and place Lauren went missing. Investigators followed every thread. Each ended in disappointment. None of them led to her. The most gut-wrenching part wasn't the dead ends. It was the possibility that someone was lying all along, that Lauren's disappearance wasn't random, that it wasn't the work of a passing predator or a tragic accident on the street, that it had happened behind closed doors, under a roof she trusted, in the company of people she believed would protect her. It's difficult to believe in coincidences when all the signs point to control, the coordinated silence, the refusal to cooperate, the legal maneuvering, the guarded statements, the way the last 3 known people to see Lauren alive, all lawyered up within days, refused to speak publicly again and resumed their lives as if nothing had happened. That silence, impenetrable, deliberate, and permanent, was deafening. Charlene and Robert Spierer fought against it for as long as they could. They returned to Indiana often, held memorials, kept Lauren's name alive in interviews, and pushed law enforcement to treat the people involved not as witnesses, but as potential suspects. But the Spierers were not detectives. They couldn't issue subpoenas. They couldn't compel anyone to speak. All they had was time, and the terrible knowledge that time was not on their side. Robert Spierer died in 2022, a heart weakened by years of grief. He never found out what happened to his daughter, never recovered her remains, never got to bury her, and in his final interviews, his anger had sharpened into something more restrained, a cold, exhausted certainty that someone was lying. "I believe someone panicked," he said. "And then they chose the coward's way out." After Robert's death, Charlene's public appearances became more sparse. She no longer asked questions. She made statements, firm, unwavering, grim. "You don't just disappear," she told a podcast host. "Your daughter doesn't walk out of a building barefoot and vanish. Someone took her, or someone killed her, and someone hid it. That's not speculation. That's the only thing that makes sense. And perhaps that's what makes this case so haunting. It makes too much sense. The narrative from the outside appears almost self-explanatory. A young woman, barely 90 pounds, drinking heavily, taking prescription medication, hanging out with men who didn't know her well, vulnerable, disoriented, out of control. Something happened. She got sick, collapsed. Or maybe she overdosed. Maybe she died in someone's apartment. And maybe they panicked. Maybe they waited too long to call for help. Maybe they cleaned it up, wrapped her in a blanket, put her in a car, drove her far out into the woods. Maybe they never spoke of it again. That's not a theory built on fantasy. That's the scenario law enforcement has quietly leaned toward for years. But theory is not evidence, and without a confession, a body, or a piece of forensic proof, it remains exactly that, plausible but unprovable. The men involved, Corey Rossman, Mike Beth, and Jay Rosenbaum, have since retreated into anonymity. Their names still appear in online forums, discussed by amateur sleuths and true crime obsessives, but none of them has been arrested or charged. Over the years, their friends and family have maintained their innocence, saying they were simply caught in the gravity of a tragedy they didn't cause and couldn't stop. But the wall they built, their refusal to speak beyond legal statements, remains unbroken. And the longer they stay silent, the more the public views them with suspicion. Jay Rosenbaum, the last person to allegedly see Lauren, moved out of state and deleted his social media. Corey Rossman relocated and has avoided all press. Mike Beth, likewise, disappeared from the public eye. They have vanished from the internet in much the same way Lauren vanished from that Bloomington street, quietly, completely, and without resolution. The case has now spanned over a decade. An entire generation of college students has come and gone since Lauren last walked across campus. The students who hang posters now weren't even in middle school when she disappeared. For them, it's history, a local legend, a cautionary tale. But for the Spierers, and for those who still whisper her name late at night, it remains a raw wound, an open question, a puzzle with one missing piece, the most important one. Could her body be buried just miles away in a location only a few people know? Could she have been taken by someone completely unrelated to that night? Could she be out there still, hidden beneath years of silence and bad memory? Those questions aren't rhetorical. They are the reason this story still matters. Because even now, justice hasn't arrived. Lauren's disappearance wasn't just a random tragedy. It was a failure of truth, of friendship, of community, a failure to speak. And in that failure lies the real horror. Not just that a young woman was taken, but that she may never come back, not because she's beyond reach, but because those who could bring her home choose not to. In 2023, Indiana State Police quietly reopened several cold cases for review under a new task force. Lauren's file was among them. Detectives reviewed old interviews, re-examined phone records, and ran new forensic tests using modern technology. Still, no new evidence. But Charlene remains hopeful. The truth doesn't disappear, she said. It just hides, and sooner or later, someone slips. There is still a reward for information leading to Lauren Spierer's whereabouts. The official tip line remains active. But no matter how many times the lines ring or emails arrive, the answer has never come. At least, not yet. In the end, Lauren's story is not just about what happened in those 6 missing minutes between Jay Rosenbaum's apartment and her planned walk home. It's about what didn't happen in the hours and days after, about the people who didn't speak, the places that weren't searched, the things that were never done. And so her story remains unfinished. She was last seen barefoot, walking away from safety, toward the thick dark of a college town's early morning hours. She should have arrived home in 5 minutes. But in that short distance, something happened. Something permanent, something invisible, something horrifying. And whatever that something was, it is still out there, still buried, still waiting. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share